Okay, and this is part four of, well, what are we calling this? The news and Christian views for today. I guess I'm still trying to work on the name, and I appreciate your suggestions and comments. It's always subscribe. We are talking about Islam. We're doing Islam 101, and this is part two in the Islam 101 series. Again, there's too much to cover. We can't do it in a short little 5-minute video. It can't be done in 10, 15 minutes. It really is whole courses in colleges established to just trying to study who Islam is and what they do and the principles and the values of Islam. So, in the end of the last video, we talked about the death of Muhammad and how his followers amassed his teachings in one area and put them in a book, and that became the Quran. Now, the religious leaders and the chiefs and the principal people at play wanted to teach the customs and traditions and how the Quran should apply to their lives. And so they began to write a book based on the traditions and the laws, which we later came to know as the Sharia Law, and that would be applied. And there's boards or committees they're so, like we have the Supreme Court, their whole business is passing Sharia law and determining what can be established there. In Islam and in the teachings, there's a lot of things that are counter and contrary to the Bible. Like I talked before, the principles are contrary to what biblical principles are. Like I say, they believe that Ishmael got the blessings from God, not Isaac. They believe that the Jews are a parasite and have perverted the word of God and twisted it. They believe that women are subjective as property, should not be educated. There shouldn't be any schools. They should be covered up from head to toe. They should be married off before they go through puberty, should never leave the house alone, should always be in the company of a male relative, should not have the right to drive. If a woman is raped, there should be at least 4 witnesses to the rape before a woman can charge a man with raping her. Any woman who even charges a man with raping her and does not have the 4 witnesses will be charged with sexual promiscuity and will be stoned to death. We're talking about cutting off hands of thieves, cutting off the head of infidels and non-believers. There is a lot in Islam and Sharia law. You cannot draw an image of Muhammad. You cannot draw an image of a person at all. It's considered a form of idolatry. And idolatry, again, like I say, they are spoken out against. Music. There's a lot of them who believe you should not have music. So a lot of the artwork is very geometrical in design. When they go into an area, a city, a state, a country, and they take over, everything becomes possession of the nation or the Islamic group. We talked about how you become a slave if you don't submit to Islam, and you have to pay a tax to exist in that land. You cannot worship as you want. If a Muslim walks by you and you do not give him due respect, he has full right to beat you, to even kill you. Everything in your possession, whether it's your home or your food or your car, that belongs to Islam once the country's taken over. The developments of your country, scientific, educational, art, architecture, whatever it is, once they take over, as always, to the victor go the spoils. To he who's in charge has the right to write history how he wants to. And so a lot of things are accredited to the Muslim people. And so you have to ask, how can a group of people that are living like they're living in the 7th and 8th century get credit for so many amazing scientific discoveries and so scientific and mathematical and architectural development when they're not allowed to do all of that? And it's because simply when they go into a culture, everything that's in there becomes Muslim, and it's all, they get credit for all of it. Then they take over, and they destroy anything that's got to do with any other religion. They destroy anything that's got to do with any other prophet other than Muhammad, any other servant of God other than Muhammad. It all must be destroyed. They're talking right now about destroying the Great Pyramids, the pyramids in Egypt, the Sphinx. In other areas, they have destroyed the tomb of Job. They have destroyed many religious areas. They want to control everything that takes away from Allah and from Muhammad. So we really can't get into all the details of all the different Sharia laws and how they all apply. Just understand that they are contrary to the United States Constitution. They are contrary to the rights and privileges of free speech, free press, free religion. All those things do not have any play. They believe that the religion is the government. So in the United States, when we deal with them on a political view and say, well, we don't deal with religions, we only deal with political parties and political establishment. And so we refuse to acknowledge that the religion is upon which they are built. And so when they began to spread and when they began to seize and the Ottoman Empire arose, they spread all over Europe. They spread all over Asia. They spread all over Africa. And it took a long time before the Christians, and we talk about the Crusades, and someone says, well, look at how bad they were and what they did. But it was hundreds of years after they spread through many of these areas, including the Holy Lands, and many churches were destroyed and millions of Christians were killed before the the Crusaders ever stood up and said, hey, look, I've had enough of this. The Pope didn't ask for the Crusaders to fight. He simply said, how long are we going to continue to put up with these Muslim horrors before somebody does stand up and fight? And the rich people, the men of estates, the lords, the barons, whoever they were that had wealth, hired armies and bought supplies and went over and attacked in the Holy Lands to try and recapture the Holy Lands. And this battle went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There's a long history of wars and battles from the very beginning, from the days of Muhammad through to today. Terrorism, and we talk about it, radical Islam today, is nothing new, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to shock anybody or surprise anybody. That's the nature of the beast. I remember in the 70s when Yasser Arafat led the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, and he began to do these terrorist maneuvers, hijacking jetliners and doing all that, blowing things up. Some of you may have seen the movie Raid on Entebbe, which is one of these movies about what they were doing. It was unheard of. They simply didn't do that. There have been changes culturally and nationally and internationally because of how radical they have become and policies have changed. In America's dealing with them, in the founding era time, Thomas Jefferson knew of their history. He educated himself. He read the Quran. He was an ambassador to some of the Muslim territories and trying to deal with the Barbary Coast pirates. He watched what Washington had to do, how he had to pay ransom for ships that were kidnapped, that were stolen, cargoes that were held ransom, ships that were held in ransom, people that were held for ransom. And he watched what Adams did. Adams did the same thing, and he differed with Adams. He didn't want that to happen, and said, we need to fight these guys. And even in the early part of his presidency, Jefferson didn't go after him. And finally, he was convinced to go after them. And so he built some navy, he built some naval ships, and found some people who were willing to go over there and attack. That became our first Marines. You may have heard the song From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli. That's a direct reference to the attacks that Jefferson launched, and the ships that went over there to conquer the Barbary Coast pirates. In those days, the Muslims did not believe in Jesus Christ. They still don't. They did not believe in the Holy Scriptures, the Holy Bible, and put any stock in it. They still don't. So when it came to the way the United States approached things, you have to remember the Founding Fathers, many of them had degrees in divinity. And many of them had the colleges that were established in America were religious colleges based on faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, it should not shock any of you. If you know what the Magna Carta is, you know it was a bunch of Puritans that came over here with a bunch of businessmen, and they sat down and wrote a document saying that we are going to establish a colony for the furthering of the name of Jesus Christ. Boom. And all the things that are involved. That's one of our founding documents. You should read it if you have not read it. The Declaration of Independence. It talks about God. It talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. That was penned by Thomas Jefferson. Okay, everybody says Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He didn't believe in God. It's clear in there that that's in there. In Thomas Jefferson's final will, last will and testament, he says he didn't try and push his religion on anybody, but let each person believe as their heart led them. He believed in individual rights, and he was not going to push it on anybody. So when it came time to accept Muslims in America, it was open to do that. But just like we don't scream fire in a crowded theater, there were limitations on what Muslims could do because the founding fathers knew that there was no greater religion in the world than the Christian religion and the established teachings that were in the Bible. The nation was built so much off of Deuteronomy. The question was asked, did we put enough Deuteronomy in the Constitution or in the establishment of our country? There is so much there biblically based, because if you want to have, as George Washington said, two pillars of government, is good morals and a sound religion, and that was Christianity. So when it came to the Muslims, and knowing their lack of faith, and knowing that they exalted Allah above God, knowing they exalted Muhammad above God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Scriptures, when it came to times to serve in public office, they were not allowed to do that, simply because you can't swear them in on the Bible. You had to swear in on the Bible to accept public office. That was useless to swear them in on the Scriptures. They wouldn't do that. Even today, there are Muslims who swear into Congress on the Quran, not on the Holy Scriptures. They were not allowed to serve as witnesses in trials because you couldn't swear them in on the Bible. And it was something that was established, this ideals of who God was, and everybody was answerable to God. We would all give an answer in the next life. Even Thomas Jefferson understood the 5 basic principles of true religion, and those being some of those basic ideas, that God was the creator of all, that our soul eventually was going to go to God, that we were going to be answerable for all our needs. Benjamin Franklin, again, one of those people everybody goes, well, he was an atheist, or he was a deist, or whatever. He believed in God. He believed in Jesus Christ, and he supported missionary work, and he supported the work of orphanages that were established by missionaries in America and the southern states and things like that. Okay, so when we look at this, and we look at what's going on, and we look at the Ottoman Empire, and we understand when our founding fathers established this country, and that this was a long history of the aggressiveness and the attacks and the foundation upon which they had to deal with, we have to understand that when they wrote things like immigration into the Constitution, they did not enumerate for the government enforcement rights into it. Now, the Supreme Court might say, well, the federal government can enforce immigration law, but that's not enumerated, that's not spelled out in the Constitution. That was reserved to the states. The colonies would never give up their right to say who can come inside their colony or their state, or who could not. They knew they had to meet the ideals of the federal government, which could spell out under what conditions that would happen, but they were the ones in charge of enforcement, because a centralized government that can control the flow of people based on their religious beliefs. Our founding fathers had real firsthand knowledge, because their fathers and their grandfathers had to run blockades from Europe as Puritans, as Protestants, as Quakers, and as people that were opposed to the Catholic religion and opposed to the Pope, to escape, to come to America. They had to escape persecution, and the kings didn't want them to escape. The kings wanted to throw them in prisons. The kings wanted to confiscate their property. The kings did not want immigration. They wanted to control whole cultures, whole nations, whole groups of people of movement. And so the founding fathers limited the federal government in that. It's a basic principle. Again, if you don't know and haven't read, you're talking about things that, even though it sounds politically correct today and it sounds humane and it sounds well-meaning, when you're mad because people are arguing about allowing the Syrian refugees, hundreds of thousands, to settle in the United States, and governors are standing up across the country going, no, 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 not going to allow it to happen. Not in our state. We're not going to allow that to happen. That is something that was established. Now, here's the problem. At the end of the Civil War, the 14th, 15th, 16th Amendments were written that allow for the rights of the individual to be protected, that they get all the rights that are covered in the Constitution. That was primarily directed towards the freed slaves, towards the black men who were having their rights stolen and withheld by Democrats, by the KKK, and by landowners who were coming up with Jim Crow laws and all kinds of things. And again, Lincoln was not a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican. And for the longest time, the southern states are Democratic states, did not want the slaves to go out and own property. And even if a Democrat, they wrote laws to prevent them from buying guns and owning weapons. They wrote laws to prevent them from being able to vote. So anyways, as this deals with Islam and the founding of the nation, these things were written after the end of the Civil War. And there were many who believed that after the Civil War, that the 10th Amendment, which gives all those things which are not enumerated in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to the states, that ceased to exist. And today there are people who argue with you till they're blue in the face and say, the states can't do that, states can't decide that. And many times, either the same people who are saying, well, we need to pass a state amendment on this, and we need to pass a state amendment on that to block something or to impose something, because the federal government's not going to do it. We need to pass our own state legislation and write our own state constitution. You can't have it both ways. Either the state has the right to rule itself according to the demands of the majority of the people in the state, and the laws that stand in existence and their own state constitution, or the states don't. Okay? The states have rights, and those rights are protected according to the Constitution and according to the amendments in the Constitution. It may upset you. Change your state's constitution. If the federal government is doing something that you don't like, change the federal constitution. Get enough states together to ratify a change. Okay. Now, we'll get into the next part. I want to stop here. This is part 2. We're going to get into part 3 of Islam 101, and we're going to try and bring all of this home. We're going to try and bring all of this up to date from the time of the Founding Fathers through the late 1700s through to today and what's going on. God bless you again as we look at Islam, and I appreciate your patience. And I know there's a lot to cover, and it gets kind of wild in this next part because we're actually talking about how the nation has turned 180 degrees from where the Founding Fathers are, and they are now doing things that would have them rolling in their graves if they knew what we were doing today.